Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Lima Online. This week's edition is again taking place within the framework of Cultural Matter and more specifically of the online exhibition of Raphael Rosendahl. And the fact that it's a Cultural Matter event means that I'm here again together with my fellow curator, Jan-Robert Leegte. Hey, Jan-Robert.
Hey, Sanneke, hi, thanks. It's good to be back again. So this is part 2 of Cultural Matter featuring Raphael Rosendahl. As you all know, Cultural Matter is an online curatorial series been going on for a couple of years now, in which we take one singular, distinct digital artwork and take it as a starting point to discuss the medium specificity, the historical background, and the uniqueness of these works. We started to do this because there's still, surprisingly enough, still up to this day, there's a lot of questions and but also a lot of interest. So we visit historical pieces and discuss them. There's always a threefold program. We start with inviting the artists to exhibit the work in a physical space. That usually is problem number one, because a lot of pieces are not native in a physical space, so we will have to deal with that problem. And second, we have a talk, an interview with the artist, with a speaker. And the third event is to invite a speaker to take the subject matter of the work and to sort of dive deep. And that is where we are tonight. As you know, the natural format of having a physical exhibition is not occurring because of the COVID crisis we are in right now. So luckily, we were working with Raphael Rosendahl, and of course his natural habitat originally is the internet, so we invited him to make an online exhibition. The exhibition can be found at raphaelrosendahl.li-ma.nl. You can find the link in the chat. Just to summarize quickly, in the beginning was quite hesitant because he was, and that'll be sort of discussion of online exhibiting net artwork. He was quite hesitant because his work already is online. His website functions as a portal to his different work. So he was like, so why is it useful for me to do an online exhibition? But we did keep on discussing this, and then he came back with the idea of wanting to do a format in which he showed different instances of the same work online, something he had never done before. It was something he experimented with in physical shows, like as I can remember in the State Museum, Karen Archie show. He had 5 monitors showing the same work, and they were alternating works. So that was the starting point. So together with Lima and Raphael, we made this online show in which you can see 10 of his works which Sanneke and I curated out of his body of work, which you can view in different instances. And why? It's because he wanted to emphasize the procedural aspect of his works. So because by seeing them sort of instantiated differently 4 times, you can see that they are unique and develop in their own unique ways, which is fundamentally different as linear animation. So far that, you can visit the show, the link is online. Now I would love to introduce Michael Connor. Michael Connor, we invited because he is an expert on net art, being the artistic director of Rhizome, but also had a lot to deal with the online representation of net art, also dealing with net art shows. And we specifically wanted to hear his expertise on the history, the now and the future of online exhibiting internet art. Michael Connor, thanks for having you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I've been catching your series usually after the fact each week, and it's been really fun to see the different people that have come through and participated. I am speaking to you from Rockaway Park, New York, where I am working from home here as we are in the midst of the global COVID-19 pandemic, but it's really a pleasure to be in conversation with actual people, even on the other end of the screen. So Yeah, I guess I'm gonna kind of.
We're having a little hiccup.
Is it okay now? Every time I touch my external hard drive, it seems to stop my internet connection. So um, yeah, that's the kind of setup we're dealing with here. Yeah, but anyway, so I think I'm going to just get right into my presentation, and then hopefully we'll have some time for discussion at the end. But before I do, I just wanted to mention that I managed to finally publish the first article in a sort of series on this topic that I've been trying to sort of finish since about 2015. And so this talk was a really nice deadline to be able to finally put some of that out into the world. And of course, in this moment, there have been so many conversations about it that it felt like we had to start sharing some more of Rhizome's knowledge on the topic. So if people are interested in delving further, you can check the article that just went up today. I'm going to reference it as part of the talk. And now I'll go over to my PowerPoint. All right. Yeah, so I'm artistic director of Rhizome. My name is Michael Connor, and I'm sure that most of the people on the stream today are familiar on some level with Rhizome, but we do have a sort of interesting institutional history, which I'll just sort of point to briefly, because Rhizome was founded as a sort of online arts organization in 1996, and it began its life when artist Mark Tribe decided to found a listserv for new media artists to discuss their work. It was an email list. This kind of gesture of online community building was still relatively new. There were lots of other online communities that also existed, but I think it was really interesting that that the arts organization had that kind of community basis. It was something that was a place for artists to share resources, promote their work, and also develop a shared language around what they were doing. So all of those kinds of different roles that in the art world have been traditionally collapsed within an online community like the early Rhizome email list, those roles were sort of all mixed together in an interesting way. Rhizome had this very informal status early on, and Mark, who had been in Berlin when he founded it, didn't quite know what it should be. He knew that it was important, but he didn't know how to kind of grow it or cultivate it. And so there were a few different kinds of things that he tried early on. One of them was founding a kind of for-profit company called Stock Objects. And Rhizome was sort of like going to be a magazine that was attached to this for-profit company that would sell artists' work to kind of corporate websites. So I always like that Rhizome has this uncertain history as community organization and also as startup. And of course, very early on, Mark also recognized that that artists working with digital technologies were having serious trouble with the preservation of their work over time. And so he founded the Rhizome Art Base in 1999, or Rhizome founded it in 1999 under Mark's direction. And the Art Base was a kind of interesting archive that accepted kind of submissions from the general public. And it had a really nice design where artists could choose to copy their work to the archive, or they could choose merely to list it in the archive and retain control. So it had this very, very nice structure. And so all of that, that kind of uncertain status as a very forward-facing, future-facing organization that was interested in testing out new models, but also was interested in the historicization of the form. I think that's an ethic that we try to live up to in Rhizome as we continue on into the future. Let's see. Since 2003, Rhizome has been a partner at the New Museum of Contemporary Art in New York. Most of our activities still exist online, but we do some important programs with the museum. We're still a separate organization, but when not working from home, we're housed there, and that gives us kind of purchase within the museum world in a way that as a small online organization we wouldn't otherwise have. That partnership is really unusual, and it does kind of confuse people. But you can really think of it as an ongoing partnership where we trade and share resources, but we do remain kind of separate and independent as a small nonprofit. So today I join you here in the midst of course, this global crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think many of you will have noticed that there's been a kind of renewed attention paid to digital culture in this time. And some of that attention maybe doesn't necessarily feel entirely welcome. I think there are certain ways in which the idea of net art as something that fills in the gap has been one that people have been criticizing. And I think that's something that I certainly can relate to, even though I also welcome this attention to what I feel is a very richly deserving cultural form. So that's, in terms of the kind of question of net art. But I think online exhibition in particular is facing this really interesting moment where many institutions and organizations that really primarily focus their efforts, curatorially speaking, on the gallery space, now face questions around online exhibition making with renewed urgency. I think from an institutional perspective like that, the task might at first seem relatively straightforward. You're simply providing a point of access to the general public to programs and information that would otherwise be experienced in person. So we're seeing a proliferation of things like online viewing rooms. And what I think is interesting about these kinds of efforts is that for an audience that's sheltering in place, dealing with boredom or hardship or grief, or all three, an online exhibition that presents itself as a stand-in for a real experience, which is inaccessible, can just be a kind of depressing reminder of a life on hold. It reminds you of when it tries to aspire to be a substitute for the real thing, then it just reminds you of what's missing, what's different, what's not the same. And I think that's kind of further complicated by the way in which people are using this moment of incredibly intense online attention to sort of play on attention economy dynamics and try and claim territory and that sort of thing. Nevertheless, the online exhibition can be more in this moment, I think, than a secondary space of simulation, documentation, promotion, and access. I think that institutions that hope to continue to serve their larger social and cultural mission during lockdown and beyond, I think need to engage with the specificities and histories of online exhibition making as a kind of cultural practice. The difficulty is that those histories and specificities are not particularly well mapped, and I bear as much responsibility for that as anyone. I think we all kind of know the problems that attend histories of digital culture as a whole. I think my colleague Dragan Espenshed at Rhizome has talked about the way that in digital culture, entire movements can rise and fall in a matter of very short amount of time, leaving very little kind of trace behind. And really, unless you experienced it, you can't have access to that. So there's a serious problem of telling those stories and telling them to people that weren't a part of them, especially because the history of digital culture accumulates so much in the bodies of its users. There are some ways in which this moment has weird parallels, I think, with the situation in West Berlin in the late 1960s. And I think this is a nice provocation in terms of what I hope might emerge from this moment. So the filmmaker Jerry Schum noted in the late 60s that there were numerous logistical problems to staging physical exhibitions in West Berlin. He wrote that people had a difficult time traveling to exhibitions. Arranging loans was very difficult from any institution that wasn't in West Berlin, and audiences in West Berlin couldn't really engage with exhibitions outside of the city. So the Iron Curtain created this barrier that made exhibition culture really limited for people that were living there and for institutions that were trying to operate there. And so with his partner Ursula Weavers, Schum founded the Fernseh Gallery, a television art gallery, and they mounted 2 exhibitions in this gallery over the course of the kind of coming years. The gallery has like a sort of complicated legacy, and I think that legacy is hotly debated. But I really like this idea of turning to a kind of mediated format to overcome this barrier to physical exhibition making, and how that resonates in the present moment. I think that what feels most successful in the Fernseh Gallery's story is the way in which artists working in collaboration with Schum were really able to think of television not just as a transparent window to an artwork that existed in a physically remote location, but we're thinking about, the specificities of the television apparatus. And there's two works that I think deal with aspects of that in particular. One was Jan de Betz's TV as Fireplace, which was presented on a kind of series of nights, every night, I think around midnight. And it would just show a film of a burning Yule log, which was a very simple gesture that ultimately got repeated by commercial television in the United States very famously, and is sort of a well-known trope of television history by now. But in that moment, when the domestic architecture of houses in West Berlin would have only been newly reorganized with the TV as the focal point as opposed to the hearth, this piece had a kind of sculptural quality. It managed to incorporate the space in which it was viewed into a kind of and kind of call attention to those new conditions of domestic life, domestic architecture, and viewership. And the other is Gilbert and George's portrait of the artists as young men, which is a really kind of classic piece in their Living Sculptures series. And in this, they just, of course, are standing still. But so when you encounter this on television, it has this experience of a kind of rupture in the transmission. Did something go wrong? Did they forget their lines? Is there a technical glitch? But there are these cues. The smoke rising from the cigarette is in motion, so you understand, oh, it's not a technical glitch. And then they take a drag of the cigarette, and then you realize that it's actually that it's actually a kind of performance piece. But I think one that calls attention to the normal sort of action surrounding the TV as a temporal medium. So what I think this kind of points to is the provocation of the exhibition being inaccessible and being replaced by a mediated format gives rise to, with mixed success, an opportunity to consider television as exhibition space, in a sort of very specific way that could not be kind of replicated in a gallery. That even though it begins from this problem that's quite practical, it kind of becomes a more specific relationship with this media apparatus. So this is kind of what I try and set out in part one of the article that I published on Rhizome today around curating online exhibitions. I sort of describe, I hope provoke this kind of question of thinking about what online exhibitions specificities might be, and think about what institutions might kind of draw on that. I think that, I kind of wanted to start the article by sort of pointing out that the sort of larger history of online exhibitions is one of really intense experimentation. There are so many different examples from the history of digital culture of artists that have taken up online exhibition making and really extended it to all kinds of extremes. One example I always like to cite is this project by Crystal South, which was an exhibition Kickstarter. And I love the text. "This is not a Kickstarter, this is an exhibition. A limited edition custom collection of art objects created online." Or we have Miltos Menedes's Second Life Desert exhibition, which took place, I think, in 2008 as a kind of outdoor exhibition of digital works in Second Life. There's this kind of proliferation of forms. And I think if you're looking at that history, it's very easy to kind of get frustrated or bewildered and say, what usefully can we draw from this? Is it possible to say an online exhibition is anything at all, given this proliferation of forms? What do these projects and gestures even have in common? what ultimately is an online exhibition. In order to kind of think about that question, I sort of went back to definitions of what gallery exhibitions are. And this is a little bit of a straw man definition. It's kind of a museum studies sort of definition. Exhibition involves imposition of order on objects brought into a particular space and a specific set of relations with each other. And I think what's interesting when you look at this kind of traditional definition of the exhibition, these concepts are placed under serious duress in an online context. The first word that jumps out at me here is the word object, and something that we often talk about at Rhizome, led by my colleagues Dragon's work in digital preservation, is that within digital culture there aren't objects. What we have instead is the performance of objecthood through the kind of working together of systems and software, networks, users, artists, and files. So the word object already kind of breaks apart. The word space also jumps out at me here, because space in a coherent Cartesian sense doesn't really exist online. And I think the space can be thought of to include not only the pictorial space of the screen, but the literal space of the web canvas, the embodied space of user, the space of interaction, the space of infrastructure. And then it talks about a specific set of relations with each other. And again, trying to create relationships among objects or among artworks on the internet is an extremely fluid experience, because there's no sort of fixity. When objects are displayed online, they experience change, and that change becomes part of the exhibition experience. So I thought, I kind of like put together my own sort of definition, which is maybe gets a little complicated, but I would suggest that for online exhibition, we can say that online exhibition involves the performance of artworks and their objecthood in a particular mise-en-scène, brought into dynamic relationship with one another and a broader network context. So there's a lot in that, and I'm not going to unpack it all now. You can go back to the article to refer to it if you feel the desire. But I do want to talk about, in thinking about this definition, what is sort of most fundamental about the online exhibition, I think, is this kind of question of variability in performance. Okay, so we're going to get into that in just a moment, but before even doing that, I think we have to sort of problematize the question of online exhibition as a distinct category, because one could say that a lot of this definition applies to traditional exhibition as well. It might be just a different way of thinking about exhibitions as a whole. And of course, for everyone on this stream, I'm sure you will understand the fluid boundaries between digital culture and the art world proper. And that's something that's kind of well known to artists. But I guess one of the things that is sort of interesting about working in this space is that, really from 2007 and 2008 onwards, we've seen increasing, really rapid customization of online audiences to seeing physical artworks on screen. So with projects like Vork, which I think was founded in 2007, a blog where they posted image streams of contemporary art projects, there was a kind of increasing acclimatization of networked devices as a context, a primary context for experiencing works of art. I think audiences made that shift over the past 10 years quite clearly. I'm missing one of the slides I was really excited to show here. Oops. It's okay. But on the level, so even as audiences have made that shift quite fluidly, on the level of institutions, we see that the curators who work in the gallery and the marketing department that works on the internet are quite clearly delineated. There's this tension that gets sustained between these two disparate cultures through that. So it's really fallen on artists to kind of explore that slippage in a more interesting way. Of course, there's many examples. I have always enjoyed this example of Jasper Spissera's Generation Works, which was an artist-run space in a condo in Tacoma, Washington, that was closed to the public, but it existed as a physical gallery space where exhibitions would be mounted in like these really richly evocative web documentation will be created of them. So the audience could only experience these physical exhibitions on the internet. I think this was 2012, and it's kind of a favorite. So, this is received wisdom for everyone here, I'm sure, but the boundaries among artwork on the computer, artwork in the gallery, online and offline exhibition, it's all very intermingled, and it's not particularly productive to focus on trying to delineate this all very clearly. So even when I'm talking about what's fundamental to online exhibition, I think we have to recognize that, that this is a very fluid category. But so if we are to look at what is sort of most fundamental about the online exhibition, you might kind of connect it to the principle of variability in performance. In Lev Manovich's Language of New Media, he describes variability as one of his fundamental principles of new media art. The concept got picked up again by John Ippolito and Caitlin Jones and others as part of a discussion around preservation as part of the Variable Media Initiative, and really variability, which is the ability for a digital file to be kind of performed for a viewer in any number of ways, and then also to be altered and modified in any number of ways that might not be part of Manovich's strict definition. But this principle that the file is not a fixed, or that the digital work is not a fixed original, but instead something that really has numerous copies, none of which can claim kind of original status. I think we can think of this as a very fundamental concept of digital culture and something that can guide our thinking about online exhibitions. So in our work at Rhizome, we approach online exhibition often through the frame of trying to think about how to present older works of net art. And there are some interesting principles that arise that I think can be more broadly applied as part of that process. One of the kind of key ones is that the work of art in a digital context, it sort of doesn't really come into existence until it is performed. The language that we use around this is, and this is Dragon's language, is talking about when the artist creates a file. The file is really a sort of artifact. It exists when the computer's off. It exists when you walk away. It's always there, but it could be sort of realized, and the resources that the artist creates could be realized in any number of ways. So the artifact gets performed, and that performance is what creates the object, the object that the exhibition can include. So there's a performance of objecthood that takes place. And one of the key decisions that we find ourselves making when we are trying to create an exhibition from an artist's work is how to decide what is included in the object boundary. And in a historical context, this results in some very concrete decisions. In particular, there's a number of works that are presented in our online exhibition, Net Art Anthology, that might be like an artist-made piece that relies on external software in order to run. I think I got this out of order, so yeah. So one example of this might be the Form Art Competition by Alexei Shulgin. And this is a piece that exists online, as it's been in the C3 archives since 1997 when it was created. C3, a digital culture organization in Hungary. And so you can still access it. So it still exists in some way, but the work was kind of created to be viewed on a specific version of Netscape, I think Netscape 3. And of course, you can see that the work looks extremely different when viewed in this legacy environment. So here, for the presentation of this work in Net Art Anthology, we decided that the old browser should be included in the object boundary of this work's performance. So the performance included the artifact of Form Art, and it included the software of Netscape 3, and that was performed together to create this work in our exhibition. An interesting further example of how object boundary can be drawn, could be seen in this piece by IOD, which was a collective in the late 90s called The Web Stalker, probably well known to many people. The Web Stalker was an artist-made web browser. And so this, like form art, requires specific software on the user's side in order to work properly. I don't know why that's, I must have made this in Asia. But WebStalker as an artist-made browser required a specific operating system to run. But interestingly, it can only access HTTP 1.0 websites because it's a very old web browser, and there's very few of those that still sort of exist. So, so the performance of this work involved not only this operating system being included in the object boundary, and also the resources made by the artist, but it also involved a help document, which included links here that you can see that are to websites that still run HTTP 1.0. So the object boundary had to be expanded to include material that that could guide people in this direction, and also in some sense it included these kinds of external resources that had to be pointed to. So the artwork on its own as this browser relies on these other things in order to be performed in a meaningful way. In many cases, these kinds of external things need to, in fact, be recreated. Here's an example by Anne Hirsch for project Scandalicious. And this was a YouTube channel where Anne performed as a kind of cam girl. And in that performance, she interacted really in great depth with her fans, who would send videos back and forth. So for this project, because it took place in a specific moment of YouTube's early evolution, the interface of YouTube at that time was of some importance to the experience of the work. So this presentation actually included a full recreation, a quite creative recreation in some ways of YouTube's early interface. That was, really Frankensteined together by our software curator, Lindsay Molds. So this is an example where there's this kind of fictionally recreated resource that's brought into the object boundary. And then, of course, there's other artists that don't consider those questions of interface so important. Ryan Tricardin's 2008 YouTube piece, IB Area in Out of Order YouTube Messy Format, which was the kind of the YouTube performance, so to speak, of his feature-length film. That was much less sort of specific to a given era of YouTube, in part because part of Ryan's interest is the way that the work has circulated and been responded to by fans over time. So with this work, the contemporary manifestation of it on YouTube was as interesting as the one from the time of its publication. So it was presented in its newer interface. But at the same time, we did create an archive of it using the kind of web recorder tool. And interestingly, as part of its ongoing circulation, someone had flagged one of the videos. And so our web recorder archive now contains the only complete, I guess, version of the playlist, thanks to its ongoing circulation and YouTube's capricious platform policies. So this is that YouTube archive, or the web recorder archive. The concept of object boundary really gets materialized in the web recorder platform that Rhizome has been engaged in sort of building up over the past few years. I'm actually not going to show this video, but because web recorder captures a specific view of an experience of a web page and makes it able to be replayed in a sort of stable form, it kind of makes a very concrete delineation between what's included in a sort of presentation and what's not. What's included is what you see, and what's not included is what you didn't click on, what you didn't access, and what didn't end up in your archive. You can see in this quick demo, my colleague Lozana is recording this page on Twitter. It's capturing all the data that's being sent to her browser. And you can see the recording size growing to 10.5 megabytes. So this will create a So now she's stopping it. It goes into a collection like this, and she can then re-access the same data from a stable web archive. Okay. So those are some ways in which the performance of objecthood is shaped by decisions around what's included and what's excluded from a particular presentation. And I think for me, that more in-depth look really underlines the way in which the concept of performance can be applied to online exhibition making in a quite fundamental way. So we have to be very careful with how we use language and metaphorical tools like that. But because performance is such a strong one, in my sort of next article on online exhibition making, I'm going to kind of build on that by talking about how a lot of the decisions in online exhibition making could be thought of as sort of mise en scène. And mise en scène is a really great word because it sort of originates in theater, where it related to staging within a pretty continuous physical space. But luckily, it's already been picked up by cinema, and in cinema, the concept of mise en scène is used so fluidly that that it already incorporates things like titles and basically like non-temporal aspects of film, things like lighting or I guess the way that space is constructed through editing, although that might get into montage, which is a little bit of a distinct concept. So as part of this process, I've been thinking about, what are concepts, what are some things that we can include in the concept of mise en scène for online exhibition making. And I came up with a list. And maybe in the discussion part, people can suggest additional concepts for my list, because I have to write a whole part 2 to my online exhibition article now. So the ones that I've come up with are, okay, here's what I have. Pictorial or virtual space, and this real classic from Claude Klossky shows some nice ways that those are used in one online exhibition. On-screen interface, meaning the literal space of the web browser viewport, including metadata and informational overlays, which is maybe a distinct category. So here we have some nice informational overlays accessible when you roll over the artworks included in this project. We can also include physical space, so that would be like augmented reality, location tagging, or choreographed movement being brought into online exhibition. We can include network topography, so that might mean linked websites or hashtags, or samples or simulations thereof. The project that I showed, WebStalker, could be said to include a certain network topography. I wrote down rule sets. I don't remember what I meant by that yet. Navigation tools. So that could be hardware devices such as headsets, or on-screen devices like a map. Ready-made or customized software environments such as platforms like YouTube, software applications, operating systems. There's also live data, which might shape online exhibition. It can be brought in via API or used as part of visualization techniques that could shape an exhibition experience. We can talk about code itself. There could be software in an online exhibition that is responsive or generative, or code could be, I guess, brought in a literal way as part of the meaning making around the exhibition itself. And also infrastructure. And here I was thinking of things like El Paquete Semanal, which is the Cuban they call it the offline internet, but it's a sort of hard drive that gets copied to bodegas on different distribution sites all across Cuba, really each day, with files on it that people can copy to their own devices. And an artist in Cuba, Nestor Sire, has been running a section on that called Section Arte for the past, I think, 5 years now. So the infrastructure of El Paquete is a really kind of crucial part of that exhibition project. So yeah, I guess coming up on Risem, we're going to be publishing, I guess, my piece on mise-en-scène, but also my colleague Lozana Rosanova has done some great research on different interfaces of online exhibitions. So a lot of these questions of mise-en-scène are realized within the interface, but you have to sort of think very expansively about the interface. And I kind of like this concept of mise-en-scène as a way of getting outside of that. So I think I've been talking for a while, and maybe that was something like a provocation that we could end on. In addition to Raphael's great exhibition, I'm sure people have seen this, which makes use of some nice elements of mise-en-scène, in particular playing with like distinctions between gallery and virtual space, but also bringing in the exhibition as a kind of social process, which is part 3 of my talk, because you can see these things that represent other people as a part of it. Yeah, so I'm going to sort of stop there. I put a lot on the table, and I think ending with mise-en-scène and maybe using that as an opportunity to talk further could be useful.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was extremely interesting. My head is still spinning on where to tap in, but maybe that's not up to me, but to the audience, and maybe also to Jan Robert, whose creation you showed at the very end, because it's a website that has been made by Jan Robert. And actually, when you were talking, I was thinking of this example already, because you can meet people like represented as little bulbs in the space.
I actually didn't even know that this was Jan Robert's website, I must say.
I don't know if that's not a public secret, is it? That's just like out there in the open.
I have to just jump in here. It's a co-production between 2 students, Ties van Asseldonk, Deborah Mora, Constant Dullard, and me. So it's a project of 4 people. And the history of that project, and it's still an ongoing project, so there's more to happen. There is, I think, in too long, decade ago, Constant Dullard did a iframe show, and so we started with that, and then we added the live avatars, and we're trying to sort of build up a more, audience presence, a more avatar. Well, yeah, sort of playing around with more live aspects, which we find missing, and especially in a sort of flat exhibition of net art, so a browser context instead of a 3D world. We found that missing. So that's a little more about that.
Yeah, I really like the concept of the exhibition tour. I know that this is a little bit of like, I guess in a lot of my talk, I'm trying to convince people not to like rely too heavily on transporting ideas from the gallery space into the online exhibition. But of course, but the tour works very well, and I think what's maybe especially nice about it is that you're led around by this dot, which represents a cursor. So there's an implied presence, but maybe it's not like as cheesy as like Clippy, which is really anthropomorphized or something. So yeah, I mean, there's all these like really, one can get very formal in this conversation about how to approach these, and so in that exhibition, which I'll put it back up on the screen for a moment, maybe we should look at the website together. But I really like how you dealt with the problem of scale. And scale is a huge problem on online exhibitions, because it's really difficult to convey to people like what size of experience and what kind of time commitment is going to involve, but also like if it was a project that was put together quite lightly and wants to be offered as a light gesture versus something that's like represents a lot of heavy undertaking, it's really hard to give people a sense of what register experience to prepare themselves for. Because when you enter a building and you enter a really huge gallery space, those things are like presented to you implicitly by the architecture, the fact that you can take everything in at a glance. In Net Art Anthology, we were trying to deal with this with the concept of having sort of empty squares on the front page, which we would fill in one by one. And you have to kind of scroll through. the whole field to get a sense of like, oh, there's 100 things in here and there's a lot kind of going on. I think that worked better like during the time when it was live than it does now that it's sort of finished, because now it maybe it's hard to find one's way in from the website itself. But what you have is this map, and I love the fact that, you know, it's not you have the kind of artworks that are shown on the here, we'll go over here, PowerPoint. The artworks that are shown in this kind of map over here. So this gives me like a very nice, at a glance, like understanding of what I'm in for. I think, you know, this is the kind of edges of the experience, and also I really like that it relates to like a salon style of exhibition hanging. Was that part of the thinking of it?
Totally, yeah. And there's a lot of constant in there because Shamey isn't here. He might jump in the chat. But the original format was this salon-style iframe show with a map in the top, which Constant Dullard initiated, as I said, more than 10 years ago. And we've been layering the sort of visitor layer on top of that with the touring and everything. Yeah, I think I also love it, especially now also with the characters walking around. So you really sort of, oh, there's people hanging around that work at the back, and then you go and visit it as well. It creates a very interesting spatial experience.
Yeah, and I think that you know, in Brian O'Doherty's Inside the White, was it Inside the White Cube? Or Beyond the White Cube? Inside the White Cube.
Inside, yeah.
He so you know, the kind of classic text on and critique of the modern exhibition space, the modernist White Cube exhibition space. He talks about the transition from salon style hanging, which had an implied space in which you were looking out these kinds of windows that were like each one opened into its own sort of universe, and how the White Cube did away with the salon style hang and the kind of implied, like the implications that it had for pictorial space. So I think it's really interesting to think like this way of putting works together references this other understanding of what the exhibition space was. I think that O'Doherty talks about the salon style hang as like it puts you in this like domestic feeling of like looking out at these spaces that you kind of, it implies that you kind of own these different spaces, and that the White Cube brings these. So the artwork was like windows, but the window metaphor falls down in the modernist White Cube. A lot of the work becomes flat and opaque, and you can't look through it. Instead, it's about, you know, the literal space that you're in, which is constructed to be kind of timeless and disembodied and all these other things. So it's nice that an online exhibition might be pushing towards this re-embodied relationship with art, which involved like looking out of a window at it from an embodied vantage point, as opposed to the kind of like abstracted architecture that the White Cube involved. I don't know. That's like really half-baked, but it's got me thinking along those lines.
I think that's a very interesting analysis actually of it. But then what surprises me that once now that it comes back into the gallery space, it completely assumes the White Cube way of hanging, when actually maybe conceptually speaking that doesn't make so much sense, since it's more back to windows to the world instead of artworks relating to their spatiality or to the site specificity. I don't know.
I mean, you're absolutely right that the White Cube as kind of metaphor is really persistent in online exhibition. And, you know, it's not necessary, I don't know, there's some ways in which that could be a limitation in that the online exhibition is this opportunity to rethink all of these different practices. You know, we don't have to inherit exactly what was done from the gallery, because there's a different set of affordances to work with. And, you know, an interesting example in this regard would be something like, which is a game art organization in Pittsburgh that has created a kind of online multiplayer environment for online exhibitions. it's really, they've done 2 openings. I went to the second, which was really great. And you're in this kind of pixel art environment, interacting with people who are there as pixel avatars. And in the second of their exhibitions, which was called OMOMA, Online Museum of Multiplayer Art, each room was like a white cube in a museum that had its own sort of rules. So one was like one was a room where you role played as a family. Another was a room where you had like rhyming contests. So each one was kind of like, I think when I wrote down rule sets in mise en scène, that must have been what I was thinking about. But, you know, it's using the white cube metaphor, but it does it in an interesting way because it changes the parameters of the white cube in ways that open up other ways of thinking about it, or other ways of thinking about how to relate to that model. So on the one hand, looking back to the white cube is a limitation because it might have us doing the same things. But on the other, it allows us, like by simulating the white cube, we can change all of the parameters and understand what new ways of socializing might emerge from that. So it has its perks, but it can be a limitation.
Absolutely. And it is slightly related to a question that I saw already in the chat for a while, is that if a game theory could be useful for your next essay, but actually this already related a bit to that.
Game theory?
Yeah.
In what way exactly? I think I need clarification. Do you mean like people writing about video games?
Yeah, I'm also confused because game theory, of course, means something completely different unless it's theory about video games.
I think it is.
I haven't answered the question, which is that it would be, but maybe I've also been working with Nate Hitchcock, a curator that that was an intern at Rhizome a number of years ago, and he's written something about online exhibitions, which is actually kind of where I got the Claude Kloski example. I mean, it's out there, but he was the one that wrote about it in an interesting way in this piece. But he talks about Jesper Juul's idea of the half real, and how in games, I guess there's the sense that you kind of create only as much world as you need to allow the user to sort of fill in the gaps. So he talks about that in relation to online exhibition, which I think is a nice way of thinking, like this half real that you suggest enough boundaries that allow people to draw the kinds of connections that you need them to draw, but then leave the rest of it open. So he does a good job of that. I do maybe less of a good job of talking about game theory.
Maybe speaking of the games, because it's sort of the web sort of traditionally is a document-based format. It's sort of it's not meant to be a live format by design, but it's become that over time. Of course, games do have this live aspect. Do you think, because it seems to be missing in a lot of online document sort of exhibition formats, there's a liveness is missing. It's often an execution, or it's a document format, but to have an actual sort of performative in a more classical sense exhibition format they're quite scarce, whereas the medium really is perfectly fit to do that. Is there anything you've observed in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is really a strong history of liveness. Just now, I mean, there's just now in our kind of Rhizome Slack, we were chatting about Igor Strohmeyer's piece where he read JavaScript. I'm not sure if he did that live.
The opera?
Is that what it was?
I think it was an opera, a web opera, yeah.
You know, I think I'm kind of like imagining that Kit Galloway might watch this at some point. Who's one of the people that we've been talking to as part of our net art anthology research and other things. And you know, he was doing a lot of experiments with kind of remote collaboration beginning in the 70s. And he would say that it was always that's not the web, but it was first satellites and then later different kinds of networks. But it was very much about people being in an experience together. And then I think, yeah, I don't know. I think you're right that that is an underexplored theme, but there are, I think, a lot of hidden ways in which it has persisted. And definitely what we're seeing now is sort of a moment where people want to be in kind of online experiences that unfold collectively. And that really, I think, it's a shift. I think we've been in this kind of timeline and sort of spam-based internet attention economy for a long time. And, it's really interesting to see this very evident moment of people spending time together online around cultural experiences or shaping conversations. And there's definitely some work to be done yet to like really think through like overlooked parts of that history that might inform practice around that today.
I see another question in the audience. Has there been an exhibition of a collection of online artworks, as in recent acquisitions? So that's a very formal question.
I feel like you would know that better than I, Jan Robert. I don't know. Do you?
I'm thinking.
I mean, it calls to mind Olia Leolina's miniatures of the heroic period, but I can't remember if she was selling them or where she acquired them. I think she was selling them.
It is strange, isn't it, actually? Because I still wonder how it, you would expect a lot of institutions to have a publicly collected exhibition of online works. There are a lot of museums who have acquired the works, but they don't seem to sort of have a clear portal. I don't know. I might be mistaken here.
Acquisitions, yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, we're gonna have to text Raphael.
Yeah.
That's
I
true.
can remember the Computer Arts Fine Club, the computer, what was it? Computer Arts, the Fine Art Computer Club. What was crap? This is horrible. I should know that.
We're mixing things. Are you talking about Computers Club or Computer Fine Art?
Yeah, collection. I'm Googling now.
You share your desktop?
It's
I might have a question in the meantime that we're not all waiting for Jan Robert to Google that, and that's the inclusion of code, so to say, because often what we see when we see an online exhibition, we see the front side of a work, but when in many cases the code or the backside is also where the core of the performativity is that is constantly being reperformed. And do you know examples of where this have been part of an exhibition? I don't know myself where I'm going exactly, but
well, I think Christiana has curated maybe a definitive example of that with her Code Doc project. Do you know this work, this exhibition where I think she gave us a number of artists the assignment to move 3 points on a line or something like that. It was a very formal assignment, and then she exhibited their code and then what was executed by it. I'm pretty sure it was a Whitney Artport exhibition in 2003.
makes sense, yeah.
But yeah, that was really very much about those aesthetics of code. And of course, Igor Strohmeyer's reading of JavaScript would be another
That's true. Yeah.
good example of that.
Yeah. And in the case of the web recorder, for instance, does that also make note of the code, or is it really like a surfing experience documentation, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are at it's that's a tricky question because I think, I mean, on some level, it is capturing the code that's sent to the user's browser, but it's really very focused on experience and not about that kind of deep structure. Even though creating web recorder involves analyzing the web on a very deep structural level, I think it's not particularly designed to make that transparent to users. And I think that, honestly, when it comes to like things like platforms, there's no way to make that transparent to users, because the way that they're assembling web pages now is so complex that, with some platforms, it's actually impossible to understand like what is happening to the extent that, yeah, I mean, I can't really speak about this with a lot of authority. My colleague Dragon or Ilya Kramer from Web Recorder probably could do a much better job, but I think a lot of like really code-oriented preservation work has kind of, well, I mean, I'm not like trying to criticize anyone's work, but I think overly focusing on the code can often sacrifice experiences, specifically in the preservation world. Like what people ultimately want is to access an experience that approximates, the work on some level. So in constructing the performance of Objecthood, we make a lot of, we sometimes use things that are very authentic, but sometimes those things aren't possible to kind of recuperate, and we make our own reconstructions. And the Anne Hirsch YouTube page is an example of that. It's a complete fiction in some ways, but it is based on, primary sources. So
yeah, I know. It's a very difficult question. It also depends on the status of the code for the very core of the artwork. In some cases, I think it can't be overlooked, and in some cases, it might be able to reenact it. But there is like a core element in the code that can be very interesting, also in this way of reperforming it. That it is the sort of your score that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there is like something of a philosophical question that can lead to debate in born digital art circles. That, like, an example of it would be, we had a really great research fellow at Rhizome, Lisa Adeng, and she did research on Jodi's Untitled Game and kind of analyzed it on the code level to understand like what the modifications it was presenting to its source material. Oh, was it Quake 3D? Yes, Quake 3D. And through that, she said what's happening here is not erasure, but it's being covered up by other imagery. And in this one, it's, she was able to say on the level of the code what their operations were. So, I think that the question like can arise, like, is it always important to be like orthodox in terms of one's language around what's happening at the level of code? Or is it okay to describe the screen essentialist experience that the user actually has? And, I think in general, our philosophy at Rhizome is something that could at times be characterized as screen essentialist, because we do focus on the user's experience less than the material reality of the underlying work.
Cool, thanks. I'm going to look at Jan Robert. Did you find it?
Yeah, I did, and it's already being chatted about. Igor Stroma.
Oh, really? Oh, I completely missed that.
And Martina and Adam is in the chat, and they're all
there it
talking
is.
about
Okay.
Doran Golan's computer fine art collection.
The chat is just going on without us.
In the meantime, I posted Michael's Rhizome essay, which was requested. So,
there's a question actually I overlooked by Matt Shaw. If you know any other architects who have been involved in online exhibition design that is more three-dimensional.
How about Andreas Angelidakis?
Besides him, because I think I missed the first part. More.
I am surely offending someone by failing to think of their name right now, I guess.
I also don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at another question. Actually, I think you already answered that, Michael, because Axel asked, is there something like standardized virtual machine images or something to conserve or run artworks in? That's exactly what you've been showing and been making, right? Or is it inclusive?
Maybe I'll give a shout out for the emulation as a service project at University of Freiburg, which Rhizome has partnered with and kind of been involved with for a long time. And that is what when I was showing the WebStalker video, that was emulation as a service, which is running a configured virtual environment on the cloud. And yeah, it's, you know, it's something that I think is not really like very user friendly for artists to approach, probably. We are trying to have some conversations about like what it would look like to have international collaboration where we share resources, because those things take a lot of computing resources and could be more economical on a shared basis for, you know, for creating these environments. But basically that's like, it's running an emulator on the cloud that spins up when a user accesses it, or it could be left spinning all the time if you don't care about your cloud emulation bill, your cloud bill. And it's, you know, creating a virtual connection between the user's desktop and the computer on the server, the virtual computer. And what's nice about it is that you can configure that virtual environment in very specific ways that are, you know, set up to suit a particular artwork. So shockwave or no shockwave, you know, those kinds of questions.
Excellent.
There's another one about the screen orientation and the rough division between desktops, landscapes, and handheld devices, mobile phones, and a lot, which is, do you think if these two fundamental viewing formats had been an impact upon web-based art, and do you see web-based art becoming handheld art?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, there's been a big impact. I mean, I think it's sort of interesting to go back and think about like how people used to make a web page and say you have to have 800 or best viewed it on 800 by 600 or that sort of thing, where you could, as an artist, you could sort of specify your viewing environment. Like those days are so gone, where when you make anything on the web now, you know, you are really designing for so many different formats. It's kind of an interesting constraint, but it's also like something that can become really annoying. But I think that is actually a big driver of platform-based web creation, honestly, because, you know, as people started to use the web more and more on phone, and the number of formats that you're creating any page for began to proliferate, it became harder to feel like you made a really good web page, I think. I mean, I'm sort of projecting because I'm not like an artist working in this context, but I mean, anytime I've tried to make something online, it's gotten like way harder because of mobile phones, I have to say. Like it used to be kind of more, and so people are using tools and often using social media where you don't really have to worry about that. You can kind of create within formats. I guess I kind of liked what New Hive did in relation to this. I think New Hive was like a really needed space because not only did it allow artists to be very expressive within this really anarchic sort of like range of displays that you would have to address, but still kind of make something that made sense on different sizes. But it also then like did the other thing that the phone is really geared towards, which is creating that social experience around it. You know, you felt like you were creating as part of a community on it. And I mean, I think there have been a few things that are moving in that direction. But I think that is a real gap because, yeah, I think we're basically in the space where web art is so amorphous because the screen is so multi-sized, so varying in size, and I think that creates a real need for easier tools that artists can use to be expressive on the web.
Thanks.
But yeah, no, I'm done.
No, I just wanted to say that I received just an email by Christiane Paul, who can't log into the chat, but wants to add that Artport is a permanent exhibition of collected online artworks, since all the commissions are part of the collection. So we can add that one to it. Thanks, Christiane, for letting us know.
Yeah, it was great when the Whitney reopened and all the net artists showed their permanent collection badges on the internet. they all got an invitation to the opening as an artist in the collection, which was cool. Thank you, Christiana, for getting that artist on the guest list and many other lists.
There was another one that we just missed before. That is there something like a standardized virtual machine images or something to conserve and run artworks in?
We did just answer that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because
I was probably like checking my email by Christiana.
Server-based emulation. No,
that's true. Yeah, we did talk of that. Sorry about that.
We're it's drying up. Any last questions?
We're already receiving the first thanks. That might be a hint to round it up.
Well, that was also, I mean, this is amazing. We've been doing this, like, it's been going on for 25 years. Where do you see this going?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that we're in this really interesting phase of internet culture. Maybe not a great phase, but interesting. And I wrote like a piece for our like end of year posts for the end of the decade. But I really see, internet culture is in this really strange moment where, on the one hand, the internet is becoming like really a core part of citizenship and existence in the world. It's kind of becoming less and less optional to even have like a Facebook account. I mean, this has been a trend, but what's interesting is that the trend kind of continues even as now people hate Facebook more. Maybe Facebook is only sort of one example, but there's all these ways where the internet is really core to accessing health, jobs, education. The pandemic has accelerated that. So it has this really essential role. At the same time, internet culture is sort of in a difficult place because, the sense of independence and play that was important to artists' work all these years is harder to find sort of space for amidst this like very serious internet. I think there are ways in which artists always find those spaces, but we have this consolidation of like the internet citizenship model of internet. But a sort of side effect of the internet citizenship model is that we're starting to see more and more like national fracturing around the internet. So the Russian sovereign internet experiment, the Great Firewall of China is something that's quite long running. We're starting to see like DNS disputes emerging, and one can sort of think of the web that we've had as being a product of like this period of a neoliberal economic structure around the world where which was based on like free flowing information. And we're in another moment geopolitically now, I think. So I think what we'll see more of is more alternative models of networking and remote kind of collaboration and communication being explored by artists that are more distinct from the kind of internet of citizens that is the sort of official space. So I think we're, what I called this in my article for the end of the year last year was it was the end of the internet. But I think the end of the internet represents not the end of networking, not the end of remote collaboration, and it doesn't represent even the end of the internet. It just represents this moment of an extremely functional internet surrounded by, I hope, like really interesting experiments surrounding that. And I think in that kind of category, I would put things like El Paquete Semanal we see in Cuba. I would put things like artists in New York that are experimenting with ham radio, and I think these kinds of interstitial exploratory phases could become very important as the internet becomes more and more serious and core to our everyday functioning. Maybe that's a weird answer. I don't know. It's been a long time.
That makes sense. Yeah, that was excellent. Maybe a good point to wrap it up.
Exactly. And we can access your article online. It's on the Horizon website.
Yeah, I posted it in the chat.
Oh, you posted it. I'm lagging behind. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to part 2 and 3 on the more to come. So.
Definitely.
5 years.
In 5 years. We might have a lot more to say on online exhibiting in 5 years. So you're invited to share your ideas in 5 years via this platform again. Let's say that. Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you, Jan Robert, for joining me, and thank you to the audience for all the lovely questions by chat. It's really super nice to engage with you all. That's it for tonight. Jan Robert, what's Cultural Matter going to be in the upcoming months?
Yes, it's nearing the summer stop. Of course, we had to make this interesting bend fully online due to the COVID-19 condition we are in. We have no idea what the future brings, but we usually, this is the last one of the before the summer season. We will be back in September. We still have 2 editions standing. Of course, they will be presented within the situation we have there. We can reveal we're thinking of working with Thompson and Craighead and Amalia Ullman, so they're rostered for the last 2 editions for this season. So I wish you can still visit the show. Is up for Raphael Rosendahl. We also put it in the chat. It's again raphaelrosendahl.li-ma.nl. Have fun exploring that. Speaking of what Michael was pointing out, I will be curating a next show at upstream.gallery next Friday opening. I will promise you some new extra features, so it'll be fun. And that's all for us.
Yeah, and of course, we will be back next week with more editions of Lima Online. Next week is a special week. It's entirely dedicated to the launch of the book, A Critical History of Media Art in the Netherlands, Platforms, Policies, Technologies, edited by Marga van Mechelen and myself. And on the occasion of this, we have institutes of media arts in the Netherlands that show themselves their history with documentation material and talks. So I have the director of STIME, of Impact, of V2, and of Lima here with me next week. So yeah, please tune in and see you soon. Thanks again. Okay.
Thank you, Michael, so much.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.
Thank you. This was so fun. Talk to you all soon, I hope.